Hey, my name is Eli Strand. I'm 36 years old, and I drive a flour truck in Cypress Mill, Texas, a hill country town with one stoplight, two churches, and a courthouse square where everything important in my life has either been lost or found, usually on a Saturday. I work for the mill itself, the granary the town is named for, hauling 50-pound bags of flour to every bakery, diner, and pizza joint in 3 counties. It's honest work with a rhythm to it. Up at 4, load by headlight, drive the farm roads while the deer are still arguing about right of way, and finish by 2. People think a delivery route is lonely. It isn't. A route is a town told in back doors. You learn who's thriving by the size of the order and who's struggling by the way they ask if they can pay on the 15th. And every Tuesday, first stop 5:50 in the morning was Calhoun's Bakery on the square. Hold that thought. Everything in this story comes out of that back door. First, the thing about me everybody in Cypress Mill already knows. The thing I've spent 20 years being polite about. My family used to be land people. The Strand Orchard, 11 acres of peaches east of town, planted by my great-grandfather, the kind of place that ends up on the labels of things. I grew up in those rows. And when I was 16, my father, who was a good man the way a flooded road is a good road, fine until weather, lost it. Drink first, then debt, then the kind of pride that won't ask for help until help has stopped taking calls. The bank auctioned the orchard on the courthouse steps on a bright blue Saturday in May, and the whole town came, because in a small town of foreclosure is theater. And I stood at the back at 16 and watched the auctioneer's hand fall, and watched my father look at his boots, and I learned what shame weighs. It weighs about as much as a peach crate. You can carry it. You just can't ever put it down. Dad lasted 4 more years. Mom moved to Abilene, and I stayed, which confused everybody, and went to work at the mill and started saving, which confused nobody, because the first time I walked into First Caldwell Bank with a deposit 18 years old, the teller, Miss Ruthie, looked at the slip and said soft, so the line couldn't hear the orchard, and I said, the orchard, and she stamped it like a notary witnessing a vow. 18 years. I'll spare you the arithmetic of it, the trucks I didn't buy, the trips I didn't take, the apartment over Dempsey's Feed I've rented since the Clinton administration. By last spring the account stood at $87,000, and old Mr. Avery, who'd bought the orchard at that auction and worked it indifferently for 2 decades, had finally shaken my hand at the co-op and said the words I'd been circling my whole adult life. I'm done with peaches, son. Spring after this one, it's yours if you're still fool enough to want it. A handshake. In Cypress Mill, from a man like Avery, a handshake is a survey stake. So that was me. A man 1 spring away from putting the crate down. Now, Calhoun's. Calhoun's Bakery has stood on the northeast corner of the square since 1961, which in Texas Hill Country years makes it a cathedral. Hank Calhoun's father built the brick ovens himself. The sourdough starter in the back room is 60 years old, fed daily like a barn cat, and half the town was raised on bread that came out of it, including me. My mother traded peaches for loaves at that back door when I was a boy. And for the last 9 years, since Hank's heart first started its long, expensive quitting, the whole operation, ovens, starter, 4 a.m. bakes, the books, the legend, has been carried by his only child. Lottie Calhoun. 32. Built out of the same stubbornness as the brick ovens. Brown hair gone caramel at the edges from working in front of heat her whole life, always twisted up and skewered with whatever pencil was nearest. Brown eyes quick as a register drawer. Flour on her somewhere at all hours, her collarbone, her eyebrow, the back of one arm, like weather that followed only her. She ran that bakery the way her father had, feed the starter, feed the town, and she had a way of talking to you across the counter fast and dry and warm underneath that made every man on my route find a reason to need bread. 9 years of Tuesdays, 5:50 a.m., me backing up to that door with her flour. It was the appointment my week was built around, and I'd have denied that under oath. She'd have coffee waiting, black, in a paper cup with E penciled on it. I'd carry the bags to the rack while she talked. About the ovens, the tourists, her dad's medications, the catastrophe of modern peaches. And I'd say maybe 9 words and drive away feeling like I'd been somewhere warm. Once a year in July, I'd bring her a crate from the Avery orchard, my orchard nearly bought at the roadside stand like a stranger, and she'd make peach hand pies on Saturday and set aside 2, and the bag always said ELI, all caps, in flour-smudged pencil, and I have kept every bag. And there it is, that's the confession. A man my age keeping pencil-marked paper bags in a kitchen drawer. Why didn't I ever say anything? Same reason I drove past the orchard twice a week without stopping. Some things you don't reach for until you can hold them properly. She was carrying a sick father and a 60-year-old institution. I was a flower man with a savings account and a last name the town still pronounced carefully. I figured there'd be time after the orchard after and after and after. I was a patient man. I want you to remember that I thought patience was the same as a plan. Hank Calhoun died a year ago, September. The whole town went to the funeral. The bakery was closed for 4 days, the longest since 1961, and when it reopened, Lottie was at the counter at 6 sharp, eyes wrecked, posture perfect, and the line out the door was silent and bought everything on the shelves by 9. What the town didn't know, what I only learned in pieces on Tuesdays, was the arithmetic Hank left behind. 9 years of heart failure is a rich man's hobby, and Hank was a baker. There'd been a second mortgage on the building back when, then a refinance. Then, in the last bad year, one of those balloon notes the brochure makes sound like a bridge, and the fine print reveals to be a plank. Lottie had signed it herself, power of attorney, to keep him home with nurses at the end instead of in a facility in San Antonio. I bought my dad dying in his own bedroom. She told me one Tuesday, flat, wiping the counter in circles that were already clean. Best money anyone ever spent. The bank disagrees. The balloon came due in March. First Caldwell, which is not Ms. Ruthie anymore, Miss Ruthie retired, it's a regional outfit out of Austin now with a logo like a hawk, gave her 90 days. She sold her dad's truck, she sold the catering van, she ran a Sunday pie subscription that half the county joined, and it moved the number the way a teaspoon moves a pond. I knew it was bad the Tuesday the coffee cup was still there, E in pencil, but her order was down to half, and a baker cutting her flour order is a farmer selling her seed corn. The notice went up on the courthouse board the first week of June between a Lost Dog flyer and the VFW fish fry. Public foreclosure AUCTN. The real property at 101 North Square, improvements thereon. Saturday, June 21st, 10 a.m., courthouse steps. The same steps, the same kind of bright blue Saturday. I stood in front of that board with my route sheet in my hand, and I was 16 years old again, watching a hand fall, watching a man look at his boots, and I drove my route that day making a sound that wasn't quite words. Here's what you need to understand about a courthouse steps auction in a town like mine. It's public the way a stoning is public. Everybody comes. They come sympathetic. Most of them, they come furious at the bank. They bring casseroles after, but they come and they watch, and the person being foreclosed on is expected to stand there and be a good sport about the worst day of their life. Lottie came. Of course she came. She stood at the front in her counter apron, on purpose. The same reason a queen wears the crown to the trial, with the bakery's keys in her fist, and the whole square watched her watch her family's 60 years get read out by a man with a clipboard, parcel and improvements, as is where is. And one row over, in a press shirt, stood Garrett Voss. Everybody knew why. Voss buys corners. He'd been working our square for 3 years, turning the hardware store into a wine tasting room and the old hotel into 11 short-term rentals with keypads, and Calhoun's brick ovens, square footage, prime corner, was the parcel he'd been circling like the hawk on the bank's new logo. He'd offered to buy Lottie out twice that spring. The second time she told him, in front of customers, that the building was not for sale and neither was she, and Voss had smiled the smile of a man who can wait for the bank to do his negotiating, and now here we all were. The bidding opened at the note balance. 62,000. Voss raised his paddle like a man hailing a waiter. And I stood at the back of that crowd, the exact place I'd stood at 16, with 18 years and $87,000 and one handshake in my pocket, doing the only math of my life that ever refused to stay math. The orchard was the plan. The orchard was the crate finally set down, the name redeemed, the whole architecture of my adult life. And 40 feet away, a woman with flour on her collarbone was holding keys to a door the auctioneer was about to hand a man who would tear out 60 years of brick oven to put in a keypad. 65, said Voss's paddle. Going once, said the clipboard. I think about what I felt in that second, and the truth is it wasn't noble, and it wasn't even a decision the way decisions feel. It was Tuesday mornings. It was a paper cup with a pencil E. It was my mother trading peaches for bread at that back door, and Hank Calhoun slipping a kid an extra roll, and the understanding, arriving whole like Dawn does, that I had spent 18 years saving to buy back something my family lost, and here was the same loss, happening to somebody else in real time, on the same steps, and I could either redeem the past or protect the present, and only one of those could still feel anything. My hand went up. 70. Every head on that square turned. Lottie's turned. I watched her find me at the back of the crowd, watched her face do confusion, then recognition, then something I had no name for yet. Voss turned too, looked me up and down, the flower man, the strand boy, and raised again, annoyed like swatting. 75. 80, I said. 82, said Voss, but he said it to me now, not the auctioneer, and I knew the sound of a man bidding past his appetite, because God knows I'd grown up on the other sound. 86,000, I said, which was everything, which was the orchard, which was 18 years of not buying trucks, and the square went so quiet you could hear the courthouse flag snap, and Garrett Voss looked at me for a long moment, did his own math, and lowered his paddle. The hand fell. Same steps, same blue sky, different direction entirely. The clipboard man said, sold. Sir, the property conveys to you. Name for the record. And I looked past him, at Lottie Calhoun standing there with her father's keys in her white-knuckled fist and her eyes filling up with a question she was too proud to ask in front of the whole town, and I answered the record, but I said it to her. Eli Strand. And put this in the record too, it stays hers. The square applauded. I want to be honest. It's a good memory, the sound of it. Caps coming off. Somebody's grandmother whooping. But the person who wasn't applauding was Lottie. She came through that crowd like weather, stopped 2 feet in front of me, and said low, so only I could hear it. What did you just do? Kept the oven lit, I said. With what, Ely? Her eyes were going back and forth across my face like she was reading a notice. I know what you make. The whole town knows what that account was for. Everybody in this county knows what that account was for. And there it was, already fast as she was, the thing it would take me weeks to fully understand. I hadn't handed her a rescue. I'd handed her a debt heavier than the bank's because the bank only wanted money. It's a building, Lottie. It needed a roof that wasn't Voss. It's your orchard, she said, and her voice cracked on it in front of the whole square, and she hated that. I watched her hate it, and she turned around and walked back through the crowd to her bakery and worked the Saturday rush with her spine straight as a proofing rack, and that was the entire conversation on the happiest day of my life. Here is where I'd like to tell you it turned warm. It turned Arctic. For 2 weeks, Lottie Calhoun treated me with a politeness you could skate on. The Tuesday coffee still appeared, E in pencil, because her manners were 60 years old like everything in that building, but the talk stopped. She mailed a rent check to my apartment over Dempsey's feed, first of the month, an amount she'd calculated herself off the county assessment, fair market, not a dime of friendship in it. The town, meanwhile, had decided we were a love story, which made everything worse. By July, Voss was telling anyone who'd stand still that the flower man hadn't bought a building, he'd bought a baker, and you should ask what rent she's really paying, and the words got back to her at the salon, the way those words are engineered to. She showed up at my door that night, first time ever, still in her apron, holding the rumor like a dead snake. I will pay you back every cent. She said no hello. Market rent until I can refinance, and then I'm buying it back at exactly what you paid, and I need you to sign something that says so, because I will not be a thing a man owns in this town, Eli. I watched my mother be a saint and my father be a monument, and I am not going to be a kept woman in my own grandfather's building. Okay, I said. She blinked. She'd come loaded for a fight, and I'd handed her the keys to one she couldn't have. Okay. Buyback clause, your price is my price, no interest, and a paper that says the rent's market rate and the business is 100% yours. We can have Dale Whitfield draw it up Monday. I leaned on the doorframe, on one condition. I'm not a landlord who mails things. That building's been let go for 9 years while you two were busy keeping Hank alive, and I've watched it sag from my truck every Tuesday. Wiring, roof, the awning, the front oven's fire brick. Owner pays for all that. That's the law, and the custom both. But I do the work myself, evenings, because contractors cost money and I just gave the bank all of mine. I let that hang just long enough to be a joke, and the corner of her mouth lost a battle. You'll have to tolerate me on a ladder. Lottie looked at me a long time on that landing, working the whole proposal for traps the way she worked the bank's fine print, and finding none, because there were none, and finally she said, the starter gets fed at 5 and 4. If you're going to be underfoot, you might as well learn which in Calhoun is a peace treaty. So began the strangest, best summer of my life. Days I drove flour. Evenings I climbed around the bones of a 60-year-old building with the woman it belonged to, because make no mistake, deed or no deed, that building knew whose it was. We rewired the back room, me on the ladder, Lottie feeding cable through the joists, calling instructions up through the floor like a dispatcher. We tore the rotten awning off one Sunday and hung the new one, striped like the 1961 photographs, and held our breath together while the bracket took the weight. I relayed the fire brick in the front oven with her reading her grandfather's maintenance notes out loud from a composition book, his handwriting, her voice, half a century closing like a circuit. And she taught me the starter. 5 and 4 flour and water, the smell of it like an orchard floor, 60 years old, older than either of us, fed through droughts and funerals, and Vietnam. You don't own a starter, she told me, scraping the jar, the first really unguarded thing she'd said since the auction. It can't be owned. It can only be kept alive and handed on. Daddy used to say we never sold bread at all. We sold the keeping. I looked at her in the oven light when she said that, flour on her collarbone, pencil in her hair, and I understood I was being told something about the building, and the bakery, and her, all three, and I minded my ladder and kept it to myself. The walls came down slow, the way real ones do. She started adding food to the coffee, then a stool by the oven, then questions. I told her about my father, the whole of it, not the town's version, the orchard rose at night when he'd walk them drunk and crying, the auction, his boots, the 4 years after. She told me about Hank's last spring, how he'd lost the ovens before he lost anything else, stood in his own bakery asking whose kitchen this was, and how some mornings she still set out 2 coffees at 4 a.m. and drank both. You and me, she said one night, both of us filthy with brick dust, sharing a peach ham pie off 1 square of parchment, we're both still working for our fathers. You know that, right? 2 grown people, up ladders at midnight, trying to buy back things from dead men. Is it working? I asked. She considered it, licking peach off her thumb. Ask me when the awning's been through a storm. The reopening, full reopening, new wiring, new roof, old everything else, came the last Saturday of August, and the line went around the corner, and Voss stood across the square in front of his wine room watching the town vote with its feet, and Lottie sent him, by a 10-year-old courier, 1 calache and a note that I never read, and that made him leave before noon. And that should be where the trouble ends. It's where the trouble would end if this were a simple story, the kind the town was already telling about us. But there was a Tuesday coming, the second one in September, and on that Tuesday, old Mr. Avery walked into Calhoun's for his coffee and his usual, and found Lottie alone at the counter, and being a man with no more sense of a room than a parade float, he said the sentence that took the whole summer apart. Shame about you and Eli, the orchard business. Spring's coming. Guess I'll be calling the realtor after all, less he's found new money under a rock. I got the call from her at 6:40 that evening. 4 words. Come to the bakery. She was at the work table when I came through the back, the composition book closed, the starter jar in front of her like a witness, and her face was the face from the courthouse steps, the one with the question she was too proud to ask, except now she asked it. Avery's orchard. Your family's orchard. The handshake. Spring. Each word laid down like cards. $86,000, Eli. It wasn't savings. It was the orchard. The actual orchard, 18 years, and you stood on those steps, and you spent it on a building for a woman who pencils your name on a coffee cup, and then you let me mail you rent checks all summer and you never said one word. Her voice didn't rise. It did the other thing, the Calhoun thing, it leveled, which is worse. Everybody knew. Miss Ruthie knew. The whole town's been watching me play house in a bakery you bought with your father's grave money, and I'm the only one who didn't know the price. Lottie. Don't. She pressed both hands flat on the work table, the way she did when a batch failed, steadying against the wood. Do you know what I've been telling myself all summer? That it was a good investment for you. Commercial corner, decent rent, smart flower man. That's the story I could live inside. And the whole time it was, her voice finally caught. It was the crate, Eli. You told me about the crate. 20 years carrying it, 1 spring from setting it down, and you picked up mine instead, and you didn't even... She stopped and started again, quieter, which was the worst register she had. I cost you the orchard. I am the auction now. I'm the bright blue Saturday somebody else has to pay for, and you'll be 60, driving flour past those trees, And someday you'll look at me across this counter and do the math of what I cost you. And I will not be standing here when that happens. That math doesn't exist. All math exists. The first raised voice of the whole story, and it cracked in the middle. I do the books. Eli. Everything costs. My dad's last spring cost this building. This building cost your orchard. And don't you dare stand there and tell me you don't think about those trees. I've seen you, July, every year. You buy your own family's peaches at a roadside stand like a stranger, and your face does a thing you don't know it does. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, furious at them. So here's what's happening. Voss came by in August, after the reopening, with a number for the business, the name, the recipes, the starter. It's a vulgar number. It's enough to hand you back your 86 and then some. I'm taking it. You'll have the orchard money by Avery's spring deadline, and Calhoun's can be a memory with a keypad, and at least the ledger will be clean and... He knew. It came out of me flat, almost rude, and it stopped her with her mouth open. Avery. He knew where the money went. Lottie, everybody knew, you said it yourself. So ask yourself why a man who watched me bid my orchard away on the courthouse steps waited until this week to come in here talking realtors in front of you. He's not careless. He's 81, and he plays dominoes like a tax attorney. I came around the table so there was nothing between us but the starter jar. He came to tell you. Because the whole town's been watching, all right, but not the show you think. They've been watching you bring a dead building back with your two hands, and watching me on a ladder grinning like a fool, and the only two people in Cypress Mill who don't know what this is are standing in this kitchen. Ellie, you want to talk ledgers? Fine, here's mine. My voice was shaking now and I let it because she'd earned the unsteady version. 18 years, I thought the orchard was the thing I was saving for. The land, the name, the redemption, set the crate down, proved the Strands End better than they started. And then the auctioneer said 62,000 and Voss raised his paddle. And I learned, in about a second and a half, what all that money had actually been for the whole time. It was never for buying back the past, Lottie. The past doesn't sell. It was so that one time in my life, when the hand was about to fall on somebody I love, I could raise mine. The word landed in the kitchen the way the first one always does. The starter jar sat between us, 60 years old, breathing. You love me, she said. Not a question. A baker checking the proof. Since about the third Tuesday, I said, there's a drawer in my apartment full of paper bags with my name penciled on them if you require documentation. And Lottie Calhoun did the last thing I expected, which should have been the first, knowing her. She laughed. Wrecked, tear-streaked flower on her collarbone, she laughed the big register drawer laugh and said, a drawer. You kept the bags and came around the starter jar and took my face in her two strong hands the way she handled dough, like something alive that she intended to see rise, and kissed me in the back kitchen her grandfather built, with the ovens ticking warm behind us, and when she pulled back an inch she said, fierce. Nobody is selling anything to Garrett Voss. Ever. And you are never paying market rent on my heart again. Do you understand? The rate is renegotiated. And I said, yes, ma'am, against her mouth. And the starter, witness to 60 years of this family, kept quietly breathing. She still paid me back. I want that on the record because she'd want it on the record. The buyback clause executed 18 months later, every cent through the register honestly, and the day Dale Whitfield handed her the deed she walked out of his office, holding it the way she'd held her father's keys, and the whole square pretended not to be watching, and failed. But that's not the end of the ledger, because I married a woman who does the books and Lottie Calhoun does not leave a column open. What I didn't know all that second autumn was that she'd been driving out to the Avery place on Sunday afternoons. Dominoes, ostensibly. And on the first Saturday of the following May, a bright blue one, she closed the bakery at noon, which never happens, and told me we were taking a drive, and turned east, and I knew the road the way you know your own pulse, and made her stop talking so I wouldn't miss the moment the trees came up over the rise. Avery was on his porch. On the table, a contract, seller financed, 11 acres, terms a flower man could carry, and Avery's domino shark signature already on it. Your wife, he said, because the wedding had been that March, in the bakery at dawn, galoshes instead of cake, the whole town in the square outside the windows, is the only person in this county who negotiates worse than she thinks she does. She offered me 10% over asking. I took 5 under. Don't tell her the difference. I owed Hank money from 1989. He pushed the pen across the table. The land remembers patient men, son. Sign it before the peaches notice. I signed it under the same sky my father lost it under. Lottie stood beside me with her hand flat on my back, the way you steady a ladder. The first crop came in that July, short and stubborn after 20 indifferent years, and every peach of it went through the bakery's back door, the door my mother used to trade at, and Lottie made hand pies all of one long Saturday, and we set aside two and ate them on the tailgate in the orchard rows at dusk, and I am not ashamed to tell you I cried into mine, and my wife, who is not sentimental, who is a Calhoun, looked away and let me, and then said, "They're better than Avery's crop." Don't let it go to your head. It's the trees, not the farmer. The sign over the bakery still says Calhoun's as it should, as it always will. But if you come in some morning, get the galoshes, and look at the chalkboard, you'll see the pies listed a particular way. Strand peach, in season. She did that without telling me. I found it the first market Saturday and had to go stand in the back room with the starter for a minute, and she let me do that too. We feed it together now, 5 and 4, flour and water. 62 years old this spring. Our kid will feed it someday. That's not an announcement, it's a forecast. Lottie says forecasts are free. And when the tourists ask about the jar, because they always ask, she tells them what Hank told her. You can't own it. You can only keep it alive and hand it on. And then she nods across the counter at me, flower man, landlord retired, orchard keeper, and says, ask him. He knows about keeping. And the awning, for the record, has been through 5 storms now, including the April one that took shingles off the courthouse itself, and it never so much as flinched because we hung it together and checked the brackets twice. I reminded Lottie of her old line the morning after that storm, the two of us standing on the square assessing the stripes. Ask me when the awning's been through a storm, and she looked at it a long minute, and then at me, and said, fine. It's working, and went in to feed the starter, and that is the most romantic thing a Calhoun has said out loud in 3 generations. People still bring up the auction. Small towns keep their Saturdays. They ask what it felt like spending 18 years of orchard money in 90 seconds on the courthouse steps. And for a long time I gave the polite answer that it worked out. Look how it worked out. The bakery, the orchard, all of it circling home. But here's the true answer, the one I figured out somewhere between a paper cup with a penciled E and a contract on Avery's porch. I didn't spend anything that Saturday. You can't spend love. It isn't that kind of money. For 18 years I thought I was saving to buy back what my family lost, and the whole time deposit by deposit, Tuesday by Tuesday, I was saving for a different transaction entirely, one no bank in Texas has a form for. 20 years ago, on those steps, I watched a hand fall and learned what shame weighs. Last June, on the same steps, I raised mine and learned what love weighs. It weighs nothing. That's the whole secret. It's the only thing you can carry your entire life that gets lighter the more of it you lift. The hand fell. The oven stayed lit. It stays hers, like I told the man with the clipboard. And me? I stay too. That part was never in the record. It didn't need to be. The whole town already knew.